Psalm 126, keep your listening guide in front of you as well, and let me read our scripture for the day. When the Lord brought back the captives to Zion, we were like men who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. And then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like streams in the Negev. Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. He who goes out weeping, carrying seeds to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with him. We've been working through a Let's Talk series, and I've enjoyed the interaction, and I've enjoyed the messages. So thank you for coming and being a part of that. Today and next week, I think are really important as we talk about who we are as a church and where we are going. And so it's even more important to me to get your feedback, to hear what you hear God saying to us. We're doing some of this on Wednesday nights, and if you can be here on Wednesday night, that's great. I know many of you cannot be here on Wednesday night, so make sure, follow me, follow my blog, email me, call me, and let's keep this conversation going because it's important right now. One of the big questions that happens in church life is, how is the church doing? How are we doing as a church? And too often, most churches look at a pretty narrow window and try to answer that question. And so it's, how are we doing today? How are we doing the last 6 months? How are we doing the last year? And if we look at too narrow of a window, we lose a lot of what God is doing. And that was the challenge for the people of Israel as well. And so this morning, as we think about who we are, I want to make sure we get really broad with what God has been doing in the life of this congregation. When things were not going well for the people of Israel, they would often get into this, where's God? What has happened to us? Why aren't we as good as the nations around us? And I find many churches get into that as well. When things have not gone as well as we had hoped, we get into the woe is us, can't do anything right, can't get anybody to do anything around here, and we kind of go down that stream. And then occasionally, when things are going really well in church life, too often we say, this is amazing. And if we just keep doing this, we'll just keep experiencing that. And there's a challenge in both places. Peter in the New Testament had that challenge. Remember on the night of the crucifixion? It doesn't get any worse for Peter. And with all that he had seen of what God had done through Jesus Christ in his life, Peter had no ability to see it at all that night. It was just, how awful I am, how terrible this is, it's all over. And then on the other hand in Peter's life, remember when he was at the Transfiguration? And he says, man, it doesn't get any better than this. Let's stop the world right now. Let's build some temples and let's just stay here, Jesus. And so the temptation is to always kind of go on one end or the other and just see God's work in such a narrow perspective. I want to make sure that we're understanding that we have been shaped by God in this congregation for 241 years. That this congregation, the people who have gathered under this name, have celebrated the work of God for 241 years. And I want to let Psalm 126 kind of guide us into this conversation today. This psalm is a joyful psalm. It talks about the restoration that is coming after the exile. And it talks about all the situations and all the circumstances that God is restoring for his people. and it feels familiar again to us. We constantly move from being oriented in life to kind of feeling like we know where everything is and we can touch it, to being disoriented by life, right? Events, things happen, and we're like, oh boy, what's going on around me? And then being reoriented again. There's a restoration period of our life. And so we're very familiar with that. It's the experience of the Israelites. Orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. It is the flow of life. By the way, it is a lot more fun to pastor a church during reorientation. It's no fun at all to pastor a church during disorientation. It's no fun being a leader of a church during disorientation, but it's the natural cycle of life. And when you've been around for 241 years, you've had some cycles. And the psalm acknowledges those life seasons. It remembers the past. It says God has acted, and that what God has done in the past, He still has all the power to do in the present and can continue to do in the future. The mighty works of the past give us a hope that He's in a repeating mood and He can do it again. And the psalmist is not just thinking about the big acts of God, those things that really did shape that early community, the Exodus and the exile. Not just thinking about those big acts of God, but he's also talking about the more natural acts of God. He talks about sowing and reaping in this passage. And we think about sowing and reaping in the life of Israel and in her relationship with God. There was first the sowing, the union of friendship with God, the orientation with God. And then there was the falling out, the tears, the sorrow, the disorientation. And there was God starting to sow again, bringing something new, the reorientation. And all the pain and suffering doesn't go away, but it's seen in the light of God gathering His people back to Him again. And through all of that, the psalmist is reminding the people of God to remember the great things the Lord has done and to be filled with joy. Remember the great things the Lord has done and be filled with joy. So part of the major thing that I want us to make sure we get today as we think about who we are, with all the challenges that church life in America brings in our time and place, that we're going to remember all the great things God has done. And we're going to be filled with joy. And so let's make sure we start there. Whatever else we might envision for our church, for our community, for our world, we will first of all be a people who acknowledge that God has done great things, and because of that, we are filled with joy. Not joy because we had a good Sunday, right? That's how people like me live. You want to talk to a depressed pastor, call them on Monday morning, right? Not joy because of a good Sunday. Not joy because the bills are being paid. Not joy because my kids or my grandkids are acting right. Not joy because my health is good. Not joy because my boss is finally letting up a little. Not joy because that church or ministry that we have been jealous of is finally leveling off. Not any of that stuff. Just joy because the Lord has done great things, and He's likely to keep doing great things. And so whatever else we are as a community of faith, we will be a people of joy. Not only a joyful people, but I want us to think about who we are in terms of a generous people. Our church, for as long as probably anybody in our buildings today can remember, has given away a significant percentage of our budget to missions beyond ourselves. Right now, that percentage is around 15%. that goes out the door to help missions happen in other places with other people. And I'm sure that there are people in this room who can tell me that there have been times in our history where that percentage was 25%. That only happens through generosity. And I've watched you all respond well to challenges that people are facing. I have witnessed the generosity of your spirit, the generosity of your finances, your time, your prayer across this community. It's never wrong to be generous. And we have been and we are a generous people. We're also a people with a great heritage. I think one of the most important conversations in our culture today is religious liberty. It's freedom of conscience. And that issue is one we can speak to, and we can speak to well. Now every year I'm going to preach a full sermon on this church's role in religious liberty in our nation. Today is not that day. It'll come again. But I want us to remind ourselves who we are in this. Our founding people, our founding pastors were instrumental in securing religious liberty in our nation and providing a model of religious liberty to the world. Friends, if nothing else happened here over 241 years, that'd be enough for me. That in some way we're part of that. Every now and then I hang out with some other pastors, and you probably know how pastors talk when we get together. It's often, how are things going at your church? And typically that answer is, are more people showing up or less people showing up? Are you making budget or are you not? And so you go around the room and, I'm making budget, I'm not making budget, whatever. When it gets to me, I just say, we were part of securing religious liberty in the United States and became a model of that for the world. But that's real good that you're making budget. Don't think poorly of that. But folks, that's our heritage. That's what we're a part of. The Lord has done great things. We're filled with joy. And so religious liberty is a huge issue in our culture today. It's core to who we are. And so we'll spend our resources, use our facilities, we'll start new ministries, we'll build relationships, we will give our lives to sharing the great news that in Jesus Christ, people can be restored to the Father. That in the grace of Jesus Christ, we can find forgiveness for our sins, that in the mercy of Jesus Christ, we can have hope for today and hope for tomorrow. With all that we are, we will share that message. And we will respect a person's decision to reject that offer. We do not believe in a coercive faith, and we do not believe in a majority faith. We are a people birthed in religious liberty. Our heritage is also loyalty. You don't go for 241 years without people who are loyal to the church, without people who persevere through difficult days. And let me say some things that I need to say today. I understand that we've had some challenging times over the last several years. And I understand that we've made decisions that people did not like. People thought we made the wrong decision. But what impresses the daylights out of me about our church is that many of us who might have voted no to this building or who might have voted no to other things are people that are here today writing checks so that we can do the ministry God's called us to do and so that we can pay for this building. Folks, that's uncommon in our culture today. What we typically do in American Christianity is we stay at a church as long as it's doing what we want it to do. And when it doesn't, we leave. And when we leave, we say things, well, God has just led me somewhere else. Right? This is what we do. But we have some models in this congregation that that's not what we do. And that's a tremendous heritage. We're loyal. We stick to it. Folks, this church is going to do things that you're not going to agree with, that you're not going to understand. That's just the nature of being in relationship with people. But we've said we're going to be a people, even in those moments, that are going to stick to it. Because the Lord is doing great things. So thank you for that model. It makes my job a little bit easier to know that that's the kind of quality of folks we have in this congregation. We're also a people who were birthed out of a spiritual awakening. I'm really big on birth stories of churches because I do think they really do form the future of that church. This church wasn't formed out of a split, wasn't formed out of ill will. It was formed out of the revivals, the spiritual awakening that was happening in our country. And this church got started. That's who we are. And so we've got to be a people that are then looking for evidence of spiritual awakening today and emerging it in our culture. We're also an innovative people. We like to start things. You might not know that about yourselves, but we are. There are churches in this community that exist because of money from this church, because of our support. We were instrumental in helping start the Culpeper Baptist Retirement Community, what is now known as Virginia Baptist Homes. We also started the Child Development Center, not in the 1980s when everybody else was starting them. We started one in the 1940s. We are an innovative people. And understand that is rare among churches today. Those are some real positive things, some things we've got to work on, is we have been a church-centric people. We have viewed the work of God solely in the terms of work through the church. And because of that, we've been a people that have been focused on fixing the church. If we just get these ministries going or get a new ministry going, it's all church-centric. It's all here. But friends, the hard news is even if we get the church running perfectly, the culture is not church-centric anymore. There was a time they were. And so being church-centric in a church-centric world is fine. But that's not the world we live in anymore. And so we've got to get kingdom focused. We've got to move the conversation out. And the conversation we'll talk about next week is more about how do we bless Babylon? How do we see the kingdom? And not so much how we are church-centric. And friends, we're an older congregation, right? Let's own that a bit. We're an older congregation, and so is the church in America. We're an older demographic. And we need to feel better about that than I think we do. And we need to see that as a great opportunity. So instead of having a constant angst about how do we get younger, how about we talk more about how do we express the faith of Jesus Christ with vibrancy in our lives? And whether that's 100, 90-year-old, 80-year-old, let's be vibrant. Let's be vibrant and let God take care of the demographic issue, right? And also understand there are loads of unchurched people, lost people, who fit very comfortably within the age demographic of this church. Let's reach them, okay? Let's focus on who God has put here and how he can use us to reach others. All right, this next one, I'm going to lose you a little bit, so hang with me and wait till tomorrow before you send me an email, okay? We have been a people willing to change. Now, the challenge is we're fairly willing to do continuous change incremental change. Let me give you a couple of examples of this, and if you did not grow up in a Baptist church world, just tune me out for a few minutes because this won't make any sense to you. But we grew up with a lot of RAs and GAs, Royal Ambassador Girls in Action. Some of you will remember that. And we saw that waning, probably in my childhood. And so something that emerged out of that churches jumped on, was something called Awana. And we just kind of changed the thing and we said, woo, we're on to a new day. It was an incremental change. I'm sure it was okay. But we're going to have to move more towards discontinuous change. We're going to have to move towards disruptive innovation. So RAs to GAs to Awana was fairly simple. The hard one that was also continuous change was starting contemporary worship services, right? It was just a continuous change. I mean, all we really did was maybe change a venue, change the music, but it was continuous change. But the challenge is the church viewed that as discontinuous change. It was something radically different. And so most churches in our culture, most of us did it in the 90s, some of us did it in the 2000s, burned about 5 or 10 years arguing about this, right? That's what we did. We argued about continuous change. We just changed the music. And folks, we're going to have to stop arguing, or acting like discontinuous change has happened when it's just continuous change. And I think we also have to be honest that all of that got us was a reshuffling of the deck of church people. All right? So we started some churches that were contemporary model, and all we did was reshuffle people. The percentage of lost people in our culture is larger today than it was when we started that. So we got to make sure we're talking about the right things and we're doing them in the right way. And folks, our future is going to be much more about discontinuous change, disruptive innovation, whatever you want to call it. And so let's establish, knowing that that's the world we live in, and knowing that's the future of every church is going to struggle with this. Let's establish some trust in our body. Let's establish that our leadership, with the best possible motives and with the clearest understanding of our mission, that we're going to try to lead in a kingdom direction. But friends, if everything we do or suggest or ask you about sounds like something that makes sense to every person, then we're not doing something right. And if we've got to wait for every person to get on board before we do something, we're never going to impact the culture. We've got to trust each other. In a world of rapid change, we can't just sit here and do incremental change. It won't work. And in Jesus' day, when he came forward with disruptive innovation about how people relate to God, the religious leaders of his day said, too far, too fast, we're pulling you back. Folks, we've got to be willing to, not everything's going to be discontinuous change, but a lot of it is. And we're going to have a high level of trust with each other and have an understanding that says, John, I don't have any clue what you're doing on Periscope right now, but if it helps us get a message out, go do it. All right? It's got to be that level. I want to share with you an email I got from last week with the person's permission that I think captures some of what I want to make sure we get today. And last week I spoke on the role of family and the forming of faith, and I'm just sharing a bit of this email. He said, Sunday you challenged me to think far differently. I don't know if you and the church leaders will meet and determine that, or if you want us each to pitch in ideas and truly have conversations to develop these new directions, basically about engaging families in our culture. Folks, I'm thrilled to be the pastor of this church. It's a great honor to pastor a church with this kind of heritage. But I'm not going to give us a vision of where we're going to go. I don't think it's biblical. I don't think it's Baptist. We're all on the hook for this. We all have to say, God, what are you doing in this community? What are you doing in my life? And how does it connect to the body of Christ that I attend that we call Culpeper Baptist Church? And so I'm not going to give you permission to sit there and Monday morning quarterback what we're doing. We're all going to have to own it. We all have to engage. This is an everybody plays kind of event, because that's the understanding of the body of Christ. That God is bringing us together with all of our unique experiences, with all of what he's doing in our lives, to help us understand what the future will look like. And if we're going to see all that God would have us to see, we are going to think far differently. And friends, if we look like 5 years from now what we look like today, then we have failed at that. There's a culture out there that's much more interested in spirituality, that's much more interested in God than we give them credit for. But they're not as interested in the church. And so our job is to go. Our job is to understand that we've been sent and to help go and speak the good news of Jesus Christ to the world around us. It will require new thinking, new directions. I have no earthly idea where all this leads. I'm not up here with an agenda today so I can lead you to A, B, or C. I'm just saying we all better be shocked every now and then by where God is leading us. But we're always going to come back to our baseline. The Lord has done great things, and we are filled with joy. Folks, I think it's the most exciting time to be a part of the church in America. With all of the challenges, with all of the angst, with all of the opportunities, with all of the hard conversations we're going to have, because things have to change. But I'm glad to be a part of it. And I hope you'll be glad to be a part of it. And I pray that as we move forward, we'll keep coming back. We'll raise a hand every now and then and say, I don't understand this. Can you give me a little more time? And we'll raise a hand every now and then and say, I don't understand it. Might not even agree with it. But I'm going to trust you, right? I'm going to trust you. And if we can be that kind of people, based on our great history, I'm excited for the future. Let's let God continue to do his great things. Let's be a people filled with joy. Will you pray with me?